Bridget, it's great to finally be able to have this conversation. We've been waiting a while because we've both been busy with work stuff that's been cropping up. But it's we connected a while ago on LinkedIn. I was really interested in the work that you're doing in your part of the world because we both specialize in doing investigation work in the education sector, which is, at least in our part of the world, it's a fairly narrow niche. And I was really interested to see what you do, and you've got a background as a teacher as well, I think. So uh, I really want to introduce my audience to you, and this conversation is going to be really interesting, I think, because there's going to be a lot of crossover, but also some really interesting differences in the way we do our work here in Australasia versus the way you work in your part of the world. But why don't we start off this conversation with you telling us a wee bit about yourself, the work that you do, the company you work for. Yeah, go for it. Introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's great to finally be having this conversation. And yes, it's a long time coming, but hopefully worth the wait. My name is Bridget Claycomb. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an external investigator with Buehler Trapani LLP. We are a law firm that's based in California. Our offices are across the bay from San Francisco. And we do both workplace and campus investigations. And so a lot of that is across the state. We're asked to investigate allegations of discrimination, retaliation, harassment, you name it. Um, and we, like I said, we get to do that for clients across the state, school districts, and schools all throughout California. And we have attorneys that do work outside of California, but I'm a California-based attorney. So, and you're right, before I became a lawyer, I was a teacher. I was a teacher for students with disabilities. And so I get to do different types of education work now, but certainly informs a lot of my career.
So, Bridget, the investigation work you're doing, are you investigating? Uh, is it only staff, or are you also investigating matters involving students, or is it a bit of both? Talk us through that.
It's a great question. It's a bit of both. So we, and it depends on the client and the case, but we've done investigations into complaints brought by students about staff, but also about other students. We've also had cases from staff against other staff members. And so um, the answer is both.
So we use obviously some different terminology in our part of the world. So I just want to clarify, you've talked about campus, but are we talking about schools, colleges, universities? Where are the areas that you're working in?
K-12, so our primary schools all the way through 12th grade, and then also college campuses, universities, community colleges. So we do it all.
Down here, it's somewhat unusual, I guess, or maybe it's an emerging theme. It's probably something we'll talk about later. But the idea of having someone external come in and deal with matters involving students at a school level, and particularly at that primary level, so our younger children. Tell me about what that looks like for you.
Similar to what you're describing in New Zealand, I a lot of times our school districts and colleges, they tend to have staff members internally that perform these types of investigations. And so they're not always seeking an external investigator to complete this work. And the reasons why they might be seeking an external investigator um, can vary. It might be a matter of bandwidth, right? They have limited staff within those departments and may have a number of investigations to complete. And may have particular timelines that they need to complete those investigations within, and that they just need some temporary support to help with certain investigations and may ask for an external investigator to come in and help relieve some of that bandwidth. Sometimes there might be a conflict that the person that would normally complete the investigation, for one reason or another, whether it's a relationship with any of the parties or experiences from, past matters, will feel like they're conflicted out from completing that investigation. And if there's no one else that they can ask to conduct that investigation, they may look for an external investigator. And so the reasons vary in terms of student matters, particularly about other students. You're right. Typically, we're seeing a lot of the internal investigators doing that work, but there may be occasions where they ask for an external investigator to come in. Maybe subject matter, right? That might have an allegation that the internal investigator doesn't necessarily have experience in handling a certain type of case, and will choose to ask somebody with external who has that experience to handle that matter. And so I think we're similar in that regard, right? That there are folks that aren't necessarily external doing this work, and that might make it a little bit more unique to have an external investigator coming in for these, especially younger student cases. Tim, it's so good to talk to you. Can you share a little bit about yourself, Basalt Solutions, and kind of your journey from being a teacher and former police officer to now doing educational investigations in New Zealand?
Yeah, so I did start my career as a school teacher a long time ago now, and I was there for 4 or 5 years doing that work, and then I transitioned into New Zealand Police, and pretty quickly moved into the investigation space. So I qualified as a detective. I ended up working as a detective sergeant, so that's the first level of leadership in the criminal investigation branch here. So that's leading teams of detectives. And then a couple of years ago, my wife and I started to see some themes coming through from the education sector. We started to see a lot of pressure coming on schools in particular to get their investigation processes into student behaviour right. There are high expectations in terms of making sure they're doing the processes legally and ethically, and increased scrutiny on those processes as well. So there's a lot of media attention that comes onto a school when there are serious misconduct issues, but also we're living in a society now where people are a lot quicker to challenge those investigation processes. Parents have higher expectations. There are a lot of legal challenges that schools are having to deal with now, and there was very little support for schools in particular, so primary and secondary schools, very little support for them to build their internal capacity, and very little support, if no support at all, perhaps, for someone independent to come in and run those investigations, unless you're looking for a lawyer. And I'm not a qualified lawyer, so we offer a different service in that regard. So now we work across the education sector. Most of our work is in schools, and so far it's been secondary schools. But we also do some work in the tertiary sector. We do engage with primary schools from time to time, and very recently we've also just expanded into the not-for-profit sector too.
That's phenomenal. Um, Tell me, what grade did you teach when you were a teacher?
I was trained to teach secondary, but ended up doing a little bit of both. But most of my time I spent teaching those 13 and 14-year-olds, the ones that are full of energy and often get themselves into hot water as well. But I really enjoyed spending time with that age group. Yeah, a lot of fun. I love my time as a teacher.
When you were a detective sergeant, were you often conducting investigations involving youth, or was that more so now that you're a campus investigator?
In the New Zealand Police, we do have specialist teams that deal with matters involving youth So that might be anything from child protection through to youth crime units. So it's a fairly specialized area. But as a detective, you end up interacting with people of all ages. So there could be ch child protection cases, which is a team of detectives handling those high-end, um, cases involving child abuse, through to serious crimes that are committed by youth as well. So yes, regularly engaging with young people in a range of contexts.
How has your past experience as a teacher and a detective sergeant informed your current practice as an education investigator?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it, really, for both of us? A few things. I mean, I guess obviously the investigation experience is absolutely key. I mean, that is our core role. We're conducting investigations, and so I don't think it's possible to conduct good investigations without some experience behind you. Um, even just the ability to be able to conduct good quality investigative interviews, to be able to recognize all the different forms of bias that can creep into an investigation process, to be able to plan an investigation well, prioritize tasks, deal with the different people that you might be interacting with during the course of an investigation, being able to deal with lawyers and be able to have that long-term picture as well, thinking worst case scenario, where might this end up? So that there's that risk management piece as well. So all that investigation experience is obviously extremely valuable when it comes to doing investigations in the education sector. But obviously the unique part is having that education sector experience. And I've found that extremely valuable. Um, I mean, on the one hand, it helps. I think it helps me just be more realistic when I approach scenarios in a school sector in particular. Um, it's a pretty unique ecosystem, isn't it, really? And it's hard to sometimes interpret things unless you've been there yourself. So once you've been in the classroom and you've interacted with young people in a range of contexts, you get it. So it just gives you a bit more insight. I think the other thing for me, I've found it enables me to build rapport a lot quicker with teachers when I'm dealing with teachers because they know they're talking to someone who's been where they are. And rapport and being able to demonstrate empathy for people is absolutely key to being able to get the information that you need to make good, sound, factual findings, but also to be able to conduct the investigation in a way that's not going to cause long-term damage because you can conduct an investigation, go through your process, and leave everyone feeling really horribly damaged at the end of it. Or you can conduct an investigation, still make the same findings, but do it in a way that ensures that everyone feels heard and understood. And that's the piece that I've found my background has been really helpful to enable me to navigate those processes and leave people feeling good about it in the end, even if the findings aren't necessarily what they were hoping.
I have very similar thoughts. I also had the experience before becoming an investigator doing work for a nonprofit here in California that's tasked with um, advocating on behalf of people with disabilities. And so much of the work that I did involved representing families and students. And so, combined with both of my background as a teacher and really being able to see situations with that school district based expertise, but then also have the experience understanding pretty closely what families are dealing with and what students experience on the other side. It does allow me to have this unique balance and ability to see a situation from a lot of different angles. And that's so crucial for investigations and really being able to ask those questions that when you have that professional expertise so that you know to ask and that are hard to know to ask unless you've been in situations.
Yeah, and even just using the right language, I think. I mean, obviously, there's every sector, every industry has its jargon, right? It's the terminology that is specific to that sector. And if you can go into a workplace and be able to navigate the terminology that they're using, it just enables you to build connections a lot quicker and get to the truth a lot quicker, I think.
Great. It's definitely helpful and also helps you recognize when someone's telling you something relevant. And when so like you said, everyone uses their jargon depending on the industry that they're in. It's easy to just assume understanding and to kind of gloss over an acronym or to um, move on to the next piece of information and knowing when to pump the brakes and say, wait, hold on, can you explain for me what you meant by that? Can you explain what that looks like in a classroom? Especially when it's relevant, can be important when you're fact gathering. So definitely been in that situation with staff.
Yeah, and we provide training to our clients as well. So we'll go in and do workshops or do open workshops for people to come along, and we try to build their internal investigation capabilities as well, not so they're not just having to call us. We believe in trying to give them as much skills as we can, and then they can call us in when they need us. But that piece as well is really helpful because we're constantly interacting with people in the sector. So the work we do when we run a workshop, I'm listening to the different scenarios and the challenges that people are facing, and then that's able to feed back into the investigation work so that, again, I can anticipate what's coming. I can anticipate where the difficult parts are going to be.
Great. In my previous role, I was an internal investigator for a large school district, and part of the work we did was to help train our principals, our administrators, the folks at the head of our schools, their assistant principals, to conduct these internal investigations around student issues. And I am always struck by how much our school leaders are tasked with holding all at once. And I know that I think if investigations were all our school leaders were doing, they would do them perfectly well every single time, very excellent investigations. But that's just a small sliver of the work that they're being tasked to do. And what do you tell your school leaders as you train them about conducting these investigations and balancing how critical these investigations are, but also recognizing that they're stacking these investigations against so much other pressing and important work for our students?
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge, right? Juggling multiple things in the air at once, multiple commitments, and yet the investigation piece, I find when I talk to teachers, is so important because it's that pastoral care aspect. So getting investigations wrong has a massive impact. It's not just legal risk, but it also has a huge impact on the relationships with the children and young people moving forward and their families. So if we get these things wrong, it has a huge impact. And yet I'm talking to teachers who, yeah, they might they'll spend hours and hours each week conducting investigations when it's actually not their core role. I remember speaking to someone when we first kicked off who said, Tim, I feel like I'm asked to be a detective. 90% of my time I'm doing the work of a detective, and yet I don't get a single day's training on how to actually conduct an investigation.
Right. If they are getting training, it might be happening at the beginning of the year when they're trying to get their classrooms ready, or, it's happening at the same time that they're getting content related training. And it's hard, I think, just as humans, to hold information about, how we're supposed to execute on something until it's pressing, until there's an opportunity to apply those learnings immediately. And it can be challenging to get, I mean, essentially you're building the plane while you fly it, and that doesn't always lead to the best practices real time.
Yeah, that's such a good point that the skills, um, we get skills fade, right? So you can do some learning, and then in 2 or 3 years' time, you're asked to put that into practice. There's no way you're going to be able to remember everything you learnt 2 or 3 years ago. So those skills that you might walk out of some learning, some professional development, feeling really sharp, and then those skills fade very, very quickly if you're not practicing them all the time. So yeah, 100% agree with you there.
As externals, I say that in interviews to people all the time, right? They're meeting with me. It might be their first experience being a part of an investigation. And so I recognize as an external investigator, it's my all day, every day. This is what I do. I am really familiar with an investigative process, but more often than not, you're engaging with folks who aren't doing that all the time. And so um, I think it's good to keep that in mind as we conduct our investigations and do our interviews and meet with people, no matter what age they are.
Yeah, so if you're dealing with a client that hasn't had to engage an external independent investigator before, what sorts of things are you talking about with them initially?
I mean, initially, in terms of selecting that external investigator, even before they're retained, I think the things that I would tell somebody is to look at experience, right? Depending on the matter that's in front of you as the client, as you're trying to contract for somebody to do that work, do they have experience doing it? Um, will they have the training that's required to do this job that you're asking of them well? And do they have time to do it, right? Asking how quickly your investigator can get started, right? You have a duty to complete your investigation in a timely manner. And so if you're contracting and asking somebody else to do this for you, you want to make sure that they can make good on that duty to get started and to execute on that investigation in a responsible, timely way. And then if it were me, I'd be asking them about their process. An investigator's process is really their foundation. And it's the process that ensures that they conduct an investigation in a really neutral um, and objective way. And you don't want somebody who's got a different process no, depending on who's in front of them, right? And so your external investigator should be able to, generally speaking, walk you through what their typical practice is, recognizing that there might be very good supported reasons to deviate, but that your investigator would be able to explain why that would be. And so I think initially those are the three areas I would focus on. And of course, folks are going to ask about cost, and that's an important question to ask. And I find it's often one of the very first questions that we're asked because it does cost to contract out for these investigations. But I think aside from cost, those are the three things that I would ask about. How about you? What advice do you have for folks considering external investigations?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you've said. I'd add to the process bit. Um, I I like to hone in on the interviewing aspect because I think the interviews are often the way in which that's where most of your evidence comes from, right? I mean, we're not conducting criminal investigations, we're not detectives, so we don't have forensic evidence as like you might see on CSI. So a lot of it comes down to personal testimony. So the the ability of an investigator to conduct a good quality investigative interview, I think, is paramount. I'd be encouraging clients to ask the potential investigator what interviewing methodology they use and how much experience they've got conducting investigative interviews. You know, are they coming at it with a list of questions, pre-prepared questions, which some investigators will use, or do they have a different approach? I use the piece interviewing method, which is more about asking open questions and then listening to the interviewee and feeding off what they're telling me and asking follow-up questions. So it puts the interviewee at the center of the process rather than making it feel like an interrogation for them. So interviewing, I think, is absolutely key, and asking that person about what experience do you have, what methodology do you have, does it actually work, and how do you go about testing the credibility of the evidence that you then get. And a lot of that only really comes through experience. The other thing that I encourage clients to think about is whether there's an alignment on values. Um, and, an investigator an investigation process is pretty intrusive. You're getting access to a lot of personal information. Um, it can be very difficult for everyone going through the process. So you want an investigator that has values that align with yours. And I don't mean just jumping on the website and going, what's their vision statement? But actually, who is the investigator? What sorts of things do they think are important? What's the basis for, why are they doing this work? What sorts of things do they care about? Because that impacts how they interact with your staff or your students. and also impacts how they make their findings and what their report is going to look like for you.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I do think so much of that can be addressed by having a quick conversation early on at the beginning as you're contemplating whether you're going to retain the particular external investigator. Like we never hesitate to hop on a quick call and talk with potential clients, so we can have some of those discussions. Um, and so I think it's important and to make time for that and notice if your external investigator is not willing to do that.
I often end up working alongside their legal counsel as well. So the way I explain it to clients is your lawyer is there to provide you with advice and potentially advocate on your behalf. But I'm separate, I'm independent to them, just giving you the facts like you've just outlined, just providing you and your legal counsel with the facts. So for us, a lawyer might be engaged in the early stage in terms of advising the client whether or not they actually need an independent investigator. Then the process gets handed over to me to make the findings, and then my report will go back to the client, and their legal counsel then provides them with advice on that. And I don't have anything to do with that part at the start or at the finish. I remain completely independent from them, but I'm aware that their lawyer is operating in the background there.
Sometimes, kind of parallel to the investigation, the client will be working with their outside counsel to talk about things like supportive measures for the parties involved, and kind of steps to, you know, provide supports along the way. Um, and so that might be happening in parallel, but that's not necessarily something I'm in conversation with the client and outside counsel about. That would be separate from my investigation.
I want to change tack if I can completely and ask you about something a wee bit left field, which is AI, big hot topic, and a lot of people doing our sort of work are experimenting with AI and trying to get to grips with where it's appropriate, where it's not. How is AI affecting your work?
It's a big topic, big question. I know a lot of folks are grappling with this question, and I will say I am among the more risk averse, especially I think as we see headlines coming out that information that certain AI providers are saying would remain confidential or be deleted, and finding out that that may not be able to happen because of lawsuits. And so, especially where we have a duty to keep confidential client information, I tend to err on the side of not using AI as much as maybe some other folks. I'm really excited by the potential, however, right? Whether that's helping with transcription and um, synthesizing interview statements. I think there's a lot of hope in how AI can make investigations more efficient, which ultimately, the quicker that you're able to investigate, that's better for the client, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of being timely and responsive. And so the potential is really exciting. I think there just may be, you know, a gap between where we hope the technology will be and where it is currently. And I would love to see more guidance and more clarity around how we can keep information confidential and be assured that, if we're using these tools, that we can continue to protect client information. How about for you? Are you embracing AI?
I've got the same concerns as you do around confidentiality that I think everyone would share that concern. So I'm always very careful to check and double check security and make sure I've got, whatever technology I'm using, that I'm using the version that is guaranteed to be secure. But even then, very reluctant. I just don't put names of clients or anything like that if I'm using AI. I do find it very useful for the professional development workshops that we offer. So coming up with scenarios and those sorts of things. Because it's a large language model, it's obviously listening to lots of people all around the world, so I can come up with a range of different scenarios to put in front of my clients and help them think through different scenarios. And of course, there's no confidentiality issues there because it's all fictional. So it's really useful and a big time
Right.
saver in that regard, and just enables me to be a bit more creative than what I normally would be. But I also use it for business strategy as well. So if I'm sort of looking at new parts of the market, just I can bounce ideas off whatever tool that I'm using. ChatGPT is usually my go-to, and I find it really helpful for those sorts of things as well. And then there's just the basics of, come up with a template for this, come up with a template for that. But again, it's not confidential, and it's also not a lawyer, so also double checking, triple checking everything. But I find it really helpful just to give me a starting point, and like you say, it saves. Ultimately, it's helpful for my clients because I can come up with better quality work in a shorter space of time, which just helps keep the costs down for them. But you're very excited about where it's going to head in the future. We just there's so much potential. We're just going to have to get on top of the confidentiality thing. And hey, look, there's a lack of trust, and because some of the horror stories that we see in here, and these companies just going to have to get gain our trust.
I think another thing that I heard a colleague say at a meeting the other day is, at what point will we get to a place where clients are expecting us as investigators to use AI? And, for those efficiency reasons, seeing all of the potential and benefits, and how to navigate those discussions given some of the concerns. And it'll be interesting to see when that time comes, if that's going to be sooner rather than later.
So, Bridget, for the people in my part of the world who are watching this, if they might be interested in finding out more about the work that you do, but obviously you're going to have people who would need your services where you live. So, where can people find you online and find out a bit more about you and the work you do?
If folks want to find me, my law firm, Buehler Trapani LLP, has a website, and it's btinvestigates.com. And folks can learn more about our services, our approach, and more about me and our other team members at that website, and can contact us through that website too. How about you, Tim? How do people find you from my neck of the woods?
Yes, if people are interested in finding out more about what it looks like to do this sort of work down here in Australasia, my website is Basalt Solutions, so that's BASALT solutions.com. I also spend a fair amount of time on LinkedIn. You can jump on there and just look for Tim Sterne, Sterne, or the Basalt Solutions page, and we're also on Facebook as well.
Tim, thank you so much for making time to chat. It's been so good learning more about your work.
Yeah, and likewise, it's been good to find out more about what you do, and hopefully it's helpful for people just to, I guess, hear that there are similar challenges across the world, but also there are some differences that can sometimes be really helpful to hear about the differences too. So it's been a pleasure, and look forward to staying in touch.
Likewise. Thanks, Tim.